Hello and welcome to MAGA, the podcast. Our mission is to show how Don the Con bamboozled our nation. Our goal is to help make sure the cult of MAGA goes down in flames by 2028. We want to stop it before MAGA becomes unstoppable and our democracy further decays into a dictatorship. If you want the cult of MAGA to end, we have to know how it began and why it spread. Now, this is happening on an ongoing basis. Just yesterday, we had major No Kings demonstrations across the country. Millions of people turned out because they're getting tired of Trump's bullshit. Now, this is not your racist uncle's MAGA. Our MAGA stands for I'm an angry asshole, the cult of Donald Trump. And I am your host, the Disgusted American. So in our last episode, we talked about the overt and covert attacks Trump is utilizing against people and institutions, whether we're talking about lawsuits, government interference, mergers, and we talked about the impact this has on free speech at both the individual level and at the group level with the free press. As Americans, we have to hold the line on free speech and a free press, because without a free press, there's no objective reality. And all we're left is with the crazy train that is social media. So this week, we're going to take a deeper dive into how Trump is using the power of the state to go after people he doesn't like. We're going to look at it through the lens of the fall of the Department of Justice. Now, starting with his first term, Trump has faced several separate criminal and civil prosecutions.
We do begin with the breaking news late today, that stunning moment in American history. The former president, Donald Trump, found guilty on 34 felony counts, the first former president of the United States convicted on criminal charges.
The verdict against Trump, his sons, their business associates, and their businesses, finding them liable under New York's civil fraud law of engaging in persistent fraud.
Former President Donald Trump faces new charges tonight. A grand jury indicted him today on 4 felony counts related to his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. This is the third set of charges brought against the former president in the past year. Today's charges include conspiracy to defraud the United States. He will appear in court on Thursday. Special counsel Jack Smith accused Trump of knowingly spreading lies about the election to create chaos in the country, leading up to the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021.
As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government.
We're coming on the air with breaking news out of Georgia, where former President Trump was just indicted for the 4th time, this time for his alleged efforts to overturn Georgia's 2020 election results.
A jury in New York finding Donald Trump, the Republican presidential frontrunner by far, liable for sexually abusing and defaming writer E. Jean Carroll. The jury also awarding the former magazine columnist nearly $5 million in damages to be paid by Mr. Trump.
President Trump has been down this road before. Just over a year ago, the House impeached him on December 2019 on 2 charges: abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Both concerned allegations that he improperly sought help from Ukraine to boost his re-election chances. Donald Trump is the first president in U.S. history to be impeached twice.
And from the moment he began to seek the White House again, he has expressed a clear desire to get revenge against the people that he perceived were persecuting.
For hardworking Americans, November 5th will be our new Liberation Day, but for the liars and cheaters and fraudsters and censors and imposters who have commandeered our government, it will be their Judgment Day. Their Judgment Day. Your victory will be our ultimate vindication. Your liberty will be our ultimate reward, and the unprecedented success of the United States of America will be my ultimate and absolute revenge. That's what I want. Success will be our revenge. A vote for Trump is your ticket back to freedom. It's your passport out of tyranny, and it's your only escape from Joe Biden and his gang's fast track to hell. And in many ways, we're living in hell right now. I stand before you today not only as your past and hopefully future president, but as a proud political dissident. I am a dissident. Remember this, I've been indicted more than Alphonse Capone.
That's actually true, folks. The current president of the United States has been indicted more times than the most famous gangster in American history, Al Capone. Last year on social media, he posted, "Crooked Joe Biden is a threat to democracy. His weaponization of the DOJ against his political opponent is so outrageous that even his supporters are saying that it must now end. Our democracy has never seen anything like this before." Biden himself said in 2023 that he never once, not one single time, suggested to the Justice Department what they should do or not do relative to bringing a charge or not bringing a charge. Now, Trump's White House is justifying Donald Trump's increasingly severe revenge tour as fair play. They claim the Democrats did this, so we should do it right back to them. Press Secretary Karen Leavitt has said it's not weaponizing the Department of Justice to demand accountability for those who weaponize the Department of Justice. And John Lauro, who served as Trump's personal defense attorney, said this at an event moderated by the conservative Federalist Society.
And what the President administration has done, and Attorney General Bondi has made it very clear, is a retrenchment from that weaponization. So we now see no political prosecutions, no sham indictments, no fake grand jury proceedings, but instead a way of looking at the Department of Justice in terms of restoration and ensuring that the rule of law will be carried out going forward.
Now we can just cut through all of this and get to the heart of the matter. One of two things is true. One, Trump is a horrible human being who is constantly suing and being sued because he's a criminal with no morals. The other worldview is that Trump is an innocent man and everybody but him is lying. And this is a witch hunt. Because it's totally normal for an innocent person to be involved in over 4,000 lawsuits and to have 28 sexual abuse allegations against them. That could happen to anybody, right? The convictions against him in courts of law for sexual abuse and fraud, lies. The charges that he tried to find votes in Georgia, lies, despite the fact there's a phone call where he explicitly asked for that.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state. So tell me, Brad, what are we going to do? We won the election, and it's not fair to take it away from us like this. And it's going to be very costly in many ways. And I think you have to say that you're going to re-examine it, and you can re-examine it.
Impeachments for trying to tip the 2020 election in his favor and then inciting a riot when that didn't work? Not true. January 6th was merely a sightseeing expedition. It wasn't a riot. So Trump, in his worldview of the witch hunt, has decided that he's going to go after anyone that called him a criminal for doing any of his many, many crimes. This is a direct challenge to the fundamental principle enshrined in the Justice Department's rulebook. They're supposed to investigate crimes rather than targeting out-of-favor individuals. These are part of the DOJ norms and the oath that people joining the Justice Department take.
The destruction of our norms, because, I think a lot of Americans over the last 10 years realize more than we ever had before that all of this is just because a handshake agreement. Like, democracy is a handshake agreement. There's no rules. There's not a ton of rules about how this thing should work.
Yeah, or at least the rules aren't being followed.
Right.
And then you have all this gray area where you just sort of, at least historically, take for granted that people would abide by certain norms.
Yeah, Jonathan, if we zoom out, the president ran on this campaign that he was being targeted, right? And clearly a lot of Americans believed him, sympathized with that, and voted for him. He also said that the government shouldn't be used to target political adversaries the way he felt that he was being targeted. So he really isn't keeping that promise, right? Because he didn't only say, look, I'm being targeted and we shouldn't use the government to hurt our political adversaries.
The many legitimate investigations that would have to take place if the Justice Department is actually doing its job, followed by prosecutions, because these crimes are so out in the open, are going to be questioned by the American people because they're going to become so accustomed to seeing an actual weaponized Justice Department under this second Trump presidency. This is banana republic stuff, to take a step back. We, just a few years ago, would have been looking down on other societies whose, prosecutors and judges don't let the judges get off the hook, right? I mean, the judges have been blessing at the highest levels of the judiciary. I'm talking about the Supreme Court of the United States, perhaps starting with the sort of blanket immunity that it gave to Donald Trump and any other president to commit crimes. So this is really scary, obviously, and we have to take it very seriously, and it undermines the rule of law.
Now look, Trump spent years pushing the bounds on this subject. He's floated criminal charges for his opponents. He's commented on pending investigations. In fact, him and his administration go through extraordinary lengths to publicize allegations and investigations against his detractors and his critics. This flies in the face of legal ethics. You're just not supposed to do that when we're talking about allegations. One of Trump's biggest moves so far has been turning the Department of Justice into his personal Department of Grievances.
The tradition of Festivus begins with the airing of grievances. I got a lot of problems with you people. Now you're going to hear about it.
He started doing this by appointing his personal lawyers to key positions. Here's what his attorney general has to say.
Thank you, President Trump. I've known you for many, many years, and I will not let you down, and I will make you proud.
Bondi directly defended Trump in the Senate during his first impeachment. The number 2 at the department is Todd Blanche.
Joining us now, Todd Blanche, former President Trump's lead defense attorney.
He led Trump's legal counsel in New York when he was convicted of 34 felony accounts for falsifying business records to hide payments during his 2016 campaign to a porn star who alleged an affair with him. The Justice Department's intense focus on targeting Trump critics became evident after Bondi became Attorney General.
Attorney General Pam Bondi issuing several major directives on her first day leading the Justice Department, including establishing a weaponization working group that will be tasked with reviewing politicized actions of officials who investigated President Trump.
It also includes freezing DOJ funds for sanctuary cities.
Barbara McQuaid, who teaches law at the University of Michigan and used to be a federal prosecutor, says that Bondi's memo actually weaponizes law enforcement and undermines public confidence in government because it pushes a false narrative about the 2 special counsel investigations of Trump. McQuaid stressed that federal grand juries returned indictments in both of those cases.
It seems as though weaponization has been bastardized, and actually it's a bit of projection on the part of the president himself, but also his administration. They accuse Democrats of weaponizing everything, and yet all we have seen since January 20th is public institutions, federal institutions being weaponized against American citizens.
Daniel Richman, a former federal prosecutor who now teaches law at Columbia University, has said the inane claims of weaponization we hear from Trump and his associates are particularly extraordinary because Trump regularly calls for the criminal investigation and prosecution of his political enemies. He continues further that baseless claims of crimes by his political opponents have always been a staple of Trump's rants. But now that he is president and has picked Justice Department leaders for their loyalty and not their competence or integrity, the risk of abusive investigations grows. And we saw this when Bondi started firing lawyers. In fact, on July 24th, 3 Justice Department officials who were abruptly fired filed a lawsuit against Bondi seeking reinstatement and back pay, arguing that they were fired improperly and without cause. And other ex-federal prosecutors say the department is now being weaponized to please Trump. Mike Romano, an ex-Justice Department prosecutor who left in March after almost 4 years working on prosecutions of Trump allies who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, says there's literally no reason to fire these people other than to continue molding the department into Trump's personal law firm. He continued, Trump and Bondi are bringing us back to the spoils system, where the government is not staffed by merit but based on favors, and is not staffed with experts but with hacks and cronies. As a country, We decided almost 150 years ago that the spoils system is terrible and corrupt. End quote. 150 years ago. Why are we bringing it back now? It doesn't work. Hiring people based on loyalty and not competence is a recipe for disaster for a department that's supposed to be about justice. Now, as Trump's Department of Justice expands investigations of his foes and ousts dozens of lawyers and staff who worked on cases targeting him and his allies, scholars and ex-prosecutors are saying that the rule of law is under siege in the United States, and the Department of Justice is morphing into Trump's personal weapon. Peter Shane, who teaches constitutional law at NYU, told The Guardian, "It's not unprecedented for Trump to deploy their powers for personal ends, but no one, including Nixon, has done this with the intensity of Trump." He added, DOJ is now being used as a personal weapon on behalf of Trump to a degree that is without precedent. Trump has a team of sycophants and enablers at DOJ. They're not behaving the way office holders who are sworn to uphold the Constitution are expected to behave. Randall Eliason, a former federal prosecutor who now lectures on law at George Washington, stated that Trump is using the Justice Department to target his perceived enemies and pursue his political goals. The guiding principle for any DOJ prosecutor has always been loyalty to the Constitution and the rule of law. Under this administration, it appears that the primary job requirement for any DOJ prosecutor, up to and including the Attorney General, is loyalty to Trump. And now let's get into the weirdest member of Trump's new DOJ, his worst minion, Ed Martin.
You think that your support for the January 6th defendants was your undoing here, and if you regret anything?
Oh, I certainly don't regret anything.
He's been describing a neo-Nazi Holocaust revisionist who dresses up like Adolf Hitler and gives himself a Hitler mustache as a great man, a great leader, a great friend of his. And he defended him even when it was brought to attention that this was a guy who said that Hitler should have finished the job and that babies born with disabilities should be shot in the head. All of those things were brought directly to Ed Martin, Donald Trump's nominee to be the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. And instead of answering those questions or rebuking his friend Hale Cusinelli for having said these things, he instead attacked the National Public Radio, calling it government-paid propaganda.
And I have to say, these letters he's been sending, here's, 3 different medical journals. The Journal of Chest Medicine, I want you to respond to the U.S. Attorney about whether you have bias. Get back to me on that. Georgetown Law School, you have to tell me how you're instructing your kids. This is Wikipedia. He sent a letter to the nonprofit that runs Wikipedia accusing the tax-exempt organization of allowing foreign actors to manipulate information and spread propaganda to the American public. I mean, I have to say, these letters strike me as flatly authoritarian as anything we've seen from the Trump administration.
I mean, he calls the hundreds of lawyers who work at the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is a pretty venerated office of prosecutors, the president's lawyers. And he has openly said that his job is to go out there and attack the critics of the president. I have colleagues in Congress who received threatening letters from Mr. Martin in his first days in office. One of the first things he did was to dismiss cases against his own defendants, that is, rather his own clients, people who were criminal defendants in the January 6th case. He was there on January 6th, and he experienced the events of the day as Mardi Gras, he said in a tweet that he sent out as he observed the mass violence against our police officers, the attempt to storm the Capitol, the storming of the Capitol, and then the attempt to overthrow the election as Mardi Gras. It was a big day of celebration for him, and he has partaken of every form of January 6th denialism and conspiracy theory out there.
Congressman Jamie Raskin is calling for an FBI investigation of Martin for failing to disclose that he made over 150 appearances on Russian state TV and radio. asking the FBI director to investigate whether Mr. Martin's omissions were inadvertent or part of a deliberate attempt to conceal his extensive ties to Russian media and intelligence operations.
So Ed Martin is the Trump-appointed interim U.S. attorney for Washington, D.C. The Justice Department described his job this way, quote, United States attorneys serve as the nation's principal litigators under the direction of the Attorney General of the United States of America. They work for the country, in other words, not the country's president. Yet Mr. Martin is now describing himself as the president's lawyer. So who is Ed Martin? Well, he was an organizer with the so-called Stop the Steal movement who spoke at a rally in Washington the day before the Capitol attack.
Thank you for standing with all of the patriots next to you. And thank you for standing for our president. But remember, what they're stealing is not just an election. It's our future.
Martin also represented some of the January 6 rioters. He became the first U.S. attorney for Washington, D.C. in at least 50 years to be appointed without experience as a judge or a federal prosecutor, according to the Washington Post. And he makes no bones about where his loyalty lies. This is what he said online yesterday. Quote, as President Trump's lawyers, we are proud to fight to protect his leadership as our president, and we are vigilant in standing against entities like the AP that refuse to put America first. The AP is the Associated Press. Along those lines, Mr. Martin recently offered to file charges against anyone who threatens members of Elon Musk's team. And last week, in an internal email obtained by CNN, he said he was launching what he called Operation Whirlwind, saying, quote, we must protect our cops, our prosecutors, our DOJ workers, the president, and all of the government employees from threats against our nation.
Ed Martin brings a toxic blend of traits to the job. One, he's never done the job before. Now, that's not automatically disqualifying, but he doesn't know what he's doing and he doesn't understand the big principles, as reflected in what you just showed. Calling yourself the president's lawyers goes against everything the Justice Department is about. Two, he brings this startling arrogance to the job. If you look at his public statements, everything is chest beating. Everything is, I'm going to tear you down. It is not becoming of a prosecutor. And it suggests to me an amateur who's trying to act like a tough guy. And then finally, and I think most problematically, he is explicitly political. He is bringing a political agenda to seek out and seek vengeance on those who've wronged Donald Trump and Elon Musk. So there's really two components of it. One is the criminal prosecution angle, where you're supposed to bring cases without regard to politics. This guy is doing or threatening to do the exact opposite. And then there's a civil component where you defend the U.S. government in suits. But the whole notion of without fear or favor, that's another cliche we like. I mean, his public statements have been almost entirely geared towards, I will avenge Donald Trump, I will avenge Elon Musk, I will avenge Doge.
In a traditional presidency, the Justice Department, they're not supposed to even have a whiff of White House politics.
You're supposed to be separate. There's actually policies in place that both at the White House traditionally and DOJ that limit the contact and basically say, we're supposed to be separate. And, you know, one of the things that this guy has posted that I think is really outrageous is he's basically threatening people. He's threatening Jack Smith. He's threatening anyone.
He's threatening the lawyers who represented Jack Smith.
Right. So it's sort of like anyone who touched anything to do with any Trump prosecution or with any January 6th prosecution. The first thing he did when he took office was fire a whole bunch of January 6th prosecutors. By the way, he had defended January 6th cases. That's okay, but it's obviously there's a conflict of interest. And then it's not enough for him to just fire these people. He then said, and we're going to investigate you all criminally, you prosecutors. One of the things that he's really doing is he seems to be aggressively policing speech, right? One of the things he's threatened to do is, he said, I'm opening a criminal investigation of Chuck Schumer and Representative Garcia, both of whom made, inflammatory political comments. But that's not criminal. He is trying to take speech he does not like and threaten to make it criminal.
Trump's lawyers, not American lawyers, which is what the Department of Justice is supposed to be, but Trump's lawyers. Now, this psycho served as the interim prosecutor in Washington, D.C. When he was the interim AG, he did lots of weird shit, whether it's announcing investigations against his political opponents with his hashtag no one is above the law. Now, Martin threatened to chase to the ends of the earth those who have broken the law or even acted unethically, adding that no one's above the law. And he spelled it no one as one word, so noon above the law. But he has no authority to prosecute people who haven't committed crimes, who would act, in his view, unethically. What the hell does that even mean?
At one point, for instance, he was representing both sides of some of the January 6 cases. He was still attorney of record for the defendants. That's what he was doing a lot of before he became acting U.S. attorney. While he was also serving as a prosecutor in the office seeking to dismiss the charges. And I think it's a pretty obvious violation of legal ethics to be on both sides of the same case. Reuters reported that in an email to staff, Martin said he had stopped working on the cases and was, quote, under the impression that I was off the cases. But he still advocates the January 6 rioters, likening their cases to Japanese internment under FDR. He's also tried to get his office to essentially gin up baseless criminal investigations. It's a real serious no-no against, for instance, climate nonprofits. In fact, they were so baseless that the senior career prosecutor who was instructed to start this investigation resigned rather than carry out the demand. And so then Ed Martin decided to try and submit a warrant on his own. He was trying to freeze the money these organizations had. That warrant that he submitted by himself was rejected by a U.S. magistrate judge, something that very rarely happens, who found the request failed to establish a reasonable belief that a crime occurred. Here he is last July interviewing a man named Tim Hale, who he describes as a January 6th prisoner. Now, Hale might look unremarkable there in that interview, but here's what he looked like while on duty as a naval contractor in April of 2020, proudly wearing a Hitler mustache. And that was not the only time. The Department of Justice recovered these other pictures from his phone, posing with his Hitler mustache, along with several pro-Hitler images. Court filings noted that coworkers remembered Hale ranting about Jewish people and saying, and we quote here, Hitler should have finished the job. I guess Martin didn't bother to look that up before calling Hale, quote, an extraordinary man, an extraordinary leader, at an award ceremony at Trump's Bedminster Club last August. One of the things he is doing a lot of since he got into that powerful office, basically day one as the acting U.S. attorney, is this habit of firing off these menacing letters all over the place. For instance, to medical journals, from the New England Journal of Medicine to the Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology to Chest. That's a scientific journal for chest doctors. If I'm being honest, it's the first time I've ever heard of it. In these letters, Martin accuses the journals, this is the U.S. attorney, acting U.S. attorney, accusing the journals of bias and demands that they report back to him. This is the kind of thing Ed Martin does. It's sort of his thing. You might recall that he sent a letter, apparently only on social media, threatening to chase federal employees to the end of the earth to hold them accountable for anyone pushing back on Elon Musk's government efficiency folks who are flooding into agencies with barely any notice. This is someone, it would seem to me, based on these letters, who is under the impression that he lives in an authoritarian state, not a free country, where people with the policing power that he's been vested with get to just impose their will on any institution whatsoever.
He's a mess. So what were the consequences of him sucking at his job? For him being so shitty, he failed up.
Tonight, the controversial interim U.S. attorney for D.C. just got a different job. He is now moving to the Department of Justice, where he'll serve as the new director of the Weaponization Working Group. That group is tasked with reviewing officials at both state and federal levels who investigated President Trump.
He becomes the director of the Weaponization Working Group and the U.S. Pardon Attorney, where he assisted with, as you can probably guess, several pardons of his former clients that stormed our Capitol on January 6th. What the fuck, man? So in this episode, we explored how Trump has directly threatened, it's not even a threat anymore, it's happening, to turn the Department of Justice into his personal retribution arm against his enemies. How he's turning DOJ loyalty on its head, where loyalty to the Constitution is no longer the oath that's prioritized and recognized, but now the main currency is personal loyalty to Trump. Trump has enforced this change by assigning his biggest ass kissers to top roles. People like Bondi, Blanche, and weird-ass Ed Martin. Next week, we're going to take a deeper dive on what his minions did once they had power to discredit and destroy the Department of Justice. So that's all we've got for this week. If you want to help out the channel, please subscribe or follow us on your preferred podcasting platform and tell your fellow Disgusted Americans where they can find us to give us a listen. If you have a few moments, please leave us a rating on your preferred platform so more folks can find the show. Appreciate you all tuning in. Have a great night. Talk again soon. Ciao. Bye for now.